1% chance. But when you figure up the probabilities then, when you say how many, that 2 of them would occur, 3 of them would occur, by the time you get up to 10 of them occurring without explosive, you're talking about the likelihood of 1 in a trillion. So we can say that the official theory about the towers is disproved as thoroughly as any such theory could possibly be, whereas all the evidence can be explained by the alternative theory, according to which the towers were brought down by explosives. The official theory is therefore an outrageous theory, whereas the alternative theory is, from a scientific point of view, the only possible theory.
Thank you. How about that FEMA report? What does Engineering Magazine say about it? FEMA investigation is a half-baked farce, Bill Manning says, that may already have been commandeered by political forces whose primary interest, to put it mildly, lie far afield of full disclosure. The structural damage from the planes and the explosive ignition of jet fuel in themselves were not enough to bring down the towers. How about that NIST report? We got $20 million and 3 years. What happened with our tax dollars? Their task was to determine how and why World Trade Center 1 and 2 collapsed, and how and why World Trade Center 7 collapsed. Let's look at their objective. The focus of the investigation was on the sequence of events from the instant of aircraft impact to the initiation of collapse for each tower. For brevity in this report, this sequence is referred to as the probable collapse sequence. It doesn't actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for collapse initiation were reached, and collapse became, they say, inevitable. Wait a minute. You're going to spend 3 years and $20 million, and you're going to model every turbine in the airplane, and you're going to stop the entire investigation before the real action begins, right when the point where you're going to stop at the point where the truss was sagging and pulling in the first column, and you're just going to stop your analysis? How many engineers did you have working on this? And what are you concluding? They have 10,000 pages in this report. This is the half page that explains everything after that. No analysis. Let's see their conclusion. The structure below the level of collapse initiation offered minimal resistance to the falling building mass at and above the impact zone. Structural engineers do this every day. This is not rocket science. You have the known weight of this building mass. You have what are known columns below it in order to resist it. You put the building up there, and you let it go in your models, and you calculate what the resistance is. Why didn't they do it? Could it be because they knew darn well that it would not have collapsed at all? Wait, what was the report title? Final Report on the Collapse of the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Probably should have called it Final Report on the Initiation of Collapse. They also cast doubt on their own theory. They say to us in a letter to our request for correction, which several of us applied for and have yet to see adequate results from, we are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse of the Twin Towers. Thank you. We think so too. Prompting Jim Hoffman to write Building a Better Mirage, NIST's 3-year, $20 million cover-up of the crime of the century, in which he documents numerous unfounded assumptions. He documents that it's a mountain of distraction. They'll never read all this stuff. It's a tin rat. 10,000 pages, 1,000 pages modeling the airplanes. And as I mentioned, only half a page on their core presumption, classic progressive collapse. How can it be classic if it's never before happened in history? As if some initiating element in a steel frame building caused the rest of it to ever collapse. He documents the startling omissions and outrageous lies, which you'll have to go into yourself when you have a little more time, and the fudged computer simulations. They document these unrealistic scenarios C and D, and the realistic scenarios, A and B. A and B didn't make the building collapse, so they crank up the airplane speed. They reduce the strength of the structure. They increase the fuel. They do all of these adjustments until they get in the more unrealistic scenarios, which they're actually fairly open about, to get the computer model to collapse. Structural engineers rail against NIST because they refuse to show the visualization. It's a black box. You cannot download any of this data. This was a public building, or at least before 3 months prior to 9/11, it was a public building, and it should be a public investigation. Clearly, it was a public event, prompting their former chief of their fire science division, Dr. Quintier, to call for an independent review. Let's look at real alternatives that might have been the cause of the collapse of the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Do we have any whistleblowers? Yes. Kevin Ryan, fired from his job for making public the fact that NIST hired Underwriter Laboratory to perform tests. And these tests showed that the building should have remained standing. In fact, there were 4 mock samples of 35-foot spans, 2 17-foot spans, and 2 35-foot spans with fireproofing, just like in the Twin Towers with the floor decking. Now, there's 2,000 degrees of fire put underneath this assembly per ASTM E119, and twice the known amount of load that was known to have been in the Twin Towers. What happens? None of them fail. These are the 4 tests. The steel temperatures were over 1,100 degrees average. Footnote number 3 documents that no failure occurred. In fact, there was only 3 inches of deformation. What does NIST do with this experimental data? They throw it out and they claim that there's a 42-inch sag, 10 times the value that resulted from the experiments. Do we have expert corroboration? Well, here's Van Romero. It's too methodical to be a chance result of airplanes colliding with the structure, this explosive expert says. After the airplanes hit the World Trade Center tower, there were some explosives, in my opinion, inside the buildings that caused the towers to collapse. Van has withdrawn these statements after receiving a sizable grant from the federal government. Mike Taylor, a demolition expert, looked like classic controlled demolition. Collapse of the Twin Towers mirrored the strategy used by demolition experts. How about this structural engineer, Ron Brookman? Explosive clouds of dust and debris moving horizontally and vertically upward as the collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2 are just beginning does not look anything like a heat-induced gravitational collapse mechanism. Why complete collapse of the Twin Towers became inevitable? Why would all 110 stories drop straight down to the ground in 10 seconds, pulverizing the contents? None of the official reports address the issue of total collapse. William Rice, structural engineer, also with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. The prevailing theory would have us believe that each of the Twin Towers inexplicably collapsed upon itself, crushing all 287 massive columns on each floor while maintaining a free fall speed as if the 100,000 or more tons of supporting structural steel framework underneath didn't even exist. How about David Scott, structural engineer with AE 9/11 Truth? Near free fall collapse violates laws of physics. You can memorize that one. How about Scott Granger, fire protection engineer with AE 9/11 Truth? All 3 collapses were very uniform in nature. Natural collapses due to unplanned events are not uniform. How about Ed Muniak, with us today, fire protection engineer? The fires were very weak, oxygen-starved, as evidenced by the black smoke. Steel temperatures were low. All 3 World Trade Center collapses have no resemblance to any previous high-rise fire. How about Mathis Levy, who later joined the FEMA team?
If you've seen many of the managed demolitions where they implode a building and they cause it essentially to fall vertically because they cause all of the vertical columns to fail simultaneously. That's exactly what it looked like, and that's what happened.
That's what happened? What happened, Mathis, after you joined the FEMA team? Did you look for controlled demolition with your initial hunch? No. Neither did this gentleman, Ronald Hamburger, who also joined FEMA after saying, "It appeared to me that charges had been placed in the building." Never looked for controlled demolition. How about foreknowledge of these two buildings? FEMA was on site with their exercise tripod too. They had hundreds of people from FEMA, federal government, and the state Office of Emergency Management. They were getting ready for a drill in downtown Manhattan for a biochemical attack. This is per New York Mayor Giuliani. Tom Kenny from FEMA says, we arrived late on Monday night, went right into action on Tuesday. Coincidence? Maybe. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani.
I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse.
Who gave you that warning? Did you warn the firemen and women?